We've become aware of the intrusion of something otherworldly, something out of the ordinary, something from beyond the world that we know. This study is absolutely massive news, and honestly, it should be on the front page of every newspaper on Earth. There are some disturbing implications of this new Copernican Revolution, this decentering of humanity. It's a bit fishy that we don't have better pictures of 3i Atlas in the public domain by now, given that it made a close flyby of Mars. This research may well have proved that we're not the only intelligent life around here on Earth. Hello friends, I think the video you're about to watch might be the most important one that I've ever made. It's going to distill years of thought and research into a single high-potency narrative. The printing press, the Copernican Revolution, the Enlightenment, nuclear weapons, AI, UFOs, 3i Atlas, it's all in here. I think I've figured out how astrology brings all these things together. So buckle up, folks. I'm your host, Dan Waits. This is World Astrology Report, and welcome to another journey into the past to understand the present and the future. Let's start by talking about 3i Atlas, this strange, confounding interstellar object that's getting people very excited right now, mostly due to the speculations of Harvard astronomer Avi Loeb, who's pushing the idea that it could potentially be alien technology. Conventional astronomers seem mostly to be holding the line that it's just a comet, and to quote celebrity physicist Brian Cox, the wilder theories are just drivel. Nevertheless, some people think 3i Atlas is an alien spacecraft, and others think it's a natural object that's harboring some form of consciousness or life. And others say it's something that defies all our usual categories. Now, as far as I'm concerned, anything is possible. 3i Atlas may turn out to be something extraordinary, or it may well end up quietly going on its way out the solar system without us ever getting to the bottom of what it really was. What we can say for a fact is that it's weird. There are a bunch of characteristics of 3i Atlas that are very unusual when we compare it with the kind of objects we usually observe in this neck of the space woods. These include its trajectory, which is close to parallel to the ecliptic, which takes it on close flybys of Mars, Venus, and Jupiter, as well as its unusual chemical composition, its light polarization, and so on. Avi Loeb has also pointed out that 3i Atlas came from roughly the same part of the sky as the 1977 WOW signal, and he's recently suggested that it's showing signs of unusual acceleration. Now, to be clear, I certainly don't take everything Loeb says as gospel. I do think that what he's trying to do is to expand the Overton window around what you can say in science about alien life and technology and so forth. He seems to be trying to break the convention in science that you never ever invoke aliens as an explanation for anything, even if every other possible explanation has been exhausted. And honestly, I think that's valuable. That said, I know there's reason to be wary of ideas about aliens that are pushed by establishment figures who probably have close connections to intelligence agencies. I'm thinking here of Operation Bluebeam, the conspiracy theory about a fake alien invasion that would supposedly usher in world government using holograms and mind control, which honestly I find a bit silly. And then there are the famous warnings from former Nazi rocket scientist Wernher von Braun, who said that an alien threat would eventually be used to force the world to accept totalitarianism. I think one of the reasons these ideas won't go away is that we can see that if you did want to unite the world, but also create a lot of fear that justified massive military spending and authoritarian control, well, the threat of an alien invasion would probably do that. So these theories might be wrong in the details, but the general idea is plausible. And right now we're seeing a declining American empire and a rising multipolar system. Who knows what crazy schemes, quote unquote, they might deploy as a last roll of the dice to prevent the breakdown of Western hegemony. But we should also bear in mind that we don't know that's what's going on right now either. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Sometimes a strange interstellar comet is just an alien spacecraft. I have to say, I am starting to feel that it's a bit fishy that we don't have better pictures of 3i Atlas in the public domain by now, given that it made a close flyby of Mars where there are satellite orbiters that could have taken them. With all that said, my base case is that 3i Atlas should be taken as symbolic. But symbolic of what? If you're enjoying this video so far, then please do click the like button down there and let YouTube know that. And do please subscribe to the channel and enable notifications to make sure to catch future episodes. Thanks. For an astrologer, anything in the sky can, and indeed should, be read as symbolic of what's happening in the collective and individual psyche. Astrologers have been interpreting the meaning of regular, common, or garden comets for millennia, and they developed clear principles that they use to interpret them. Honestly, comets were generally seen as harbingers of misfortune and even disaster. But those principles were developed for regular local comets that were visible to the naked eye, and I'm not sure we can apply them in this strange case. So here's how I'm seeing 3i Atlas. We have a weird interstellar object in the sky, one that's made a big impact on human consciousness already. We've become aware of the intrusion of something otherworldly, something out of the ordinary, something from beyond the world that we know, into our local neighborhood, into the domain of the sun, into the mind of the sun even. The sun has been firing coronal mass ejections at this object, almost as if it's reaching out to it and trying to perceive it. Now, we can do more than just take an educated guess at what 3i Atlas means, because we actually have precedent for interstellar objects as symbolic events. And here I'm talking about Oumuamua, the first such object to be detected in our solar system. It was first noticed in October of 2017 and was given a name from the Hawaiian language, meaning a messenger from afar arriving first. In other words, a kind of scout. And this was when Avi Loeb really made his name, because he pointed out that Oumuamua behaved very strangely. First of all, it was a very weird shape, either cylindrical or pancake-shaped. And secondly, it accelerated as it was leaving the solar system faster than could be explained through normal phenomena like sublimation and outgassing. Loeb speculated this could be because Oumuamua was some form of alien technology, a probe perhaps. And this was significant because you basically never saw establishment academics and scientists publicly speculating about UFOs. And he was at the time chair of the Department of Astronomy at Harvard University, a bastion of establishment education. Now, we'll probably never know what Oumuamua really was, and of course some scientists will be deep in the cold ground before they'd ever admit it might have been alien technology. But here's the important point. Oumuamua appeared in October of 2017 as an omen. It was something from beyond, something interstellar, something, well, alien. And what happened immediately after that? In December of 2017, this famous story entitled Glowing Auras and Black Money, the Pentagon's Mysterious UFO Program, appeared on the front page of the New York Times. It described a Pentagon program to track UFOs, supposedly led by counterintelligence professional Lou Elizondo. Now, we know that the US has been investigating these things for many decades, so it seems quite possible that this whole program was some kind of public-facing front to manage perception of the issue somehow, or it was about one part of the government trying to learn what another part was doing. Nevertheless, this story was also unprecedented. We never used to see such things appearing on the front of prestigious newspapers in the US or anywhere else. The story took a relatively open-minded line on the subject. It didn't dismiss or mock the possibility that UFOs could actually exist, as is standard operating procedure in the establishment media. And around the same time, the US military released 3 videos that appeared to show UFOs, including one showing a tic-tac shaped object. And they essentially said, look, we're seeing these things and we don't know what they are. This kickstarted a new era for ufology, and it got a ton more people interested in the topic, including yours truly, actually. And it seemed to represent a change of approach to UFOs from the security services, or at least a faction of them, after decades of a policy of denials and silence and ridicule. In other words, it looked like the UFO cover-up could be coming to an end. So again, we saw an interstellar visitor for the first time, and very soon afterwards, we saw significant developments around the recognition of the existence of the UFO phenomenon. Then, in August 2019, came the sighting of the second ever interstellar object, which was named 2I Borisov after the Crimean amateur astronomer who saw it. That object was a lot more like a normal comet. It was a lot more mundane. Nobody was claiming it was a spaceship or anything too weird. And that one wasn't followed by significant developments around the UFO topic that I'm aware of, although perhaps some of you could correct me on that. Now, we have the very otherworldly 3i Atlas. In a live stream that I did in early October, I said I thought 3i Atlas was symbolic in the same way as Oumuamua. And given some of the other astrology that I'll talk about later in this video, I think it's symbolic of a kind of awakening for humanity, a deepening realization of the reality of the UFO phenomenon, but more generally to the reality of other forms of intelligent life operating in this cosmos and on this planet. As some people have pointed out, perhaps the clue to the meaning of this object is in the name, 3I Atlas. Names are important. As Laurie Lothian and I showed in our recent video on asteroids, they really matter in astrology. What could 3I Atlas mean? Well, as some people have pointed out in my comments, think of the third eye chakra and the awareness it represents. Then think of Atlas, the titan who held up the world. Is 3I Atlas signaling a profound awareness of the presence of other intelligent entities in our cosmos, and more importantly, in our own world? Could these be entities that somehow hold up or even govern the world? More than 10,000 UFO reports are filed every year in North America alone. Nevertheless, to the academic establishment, this subject is still not worthy of serious study, and the party line remains that there is, quote-unquote, no evidence that UFOs are real. Enter the astrophysicist Beatrice Villarroel and her team of researchers. Villarroel has a PhD in astrophysics and is currently an associate professor at Stockholm University. In 2017, she founded a project called VASCO, which stands for Vanishing and Appearing Sources During a Century of Observations, which sets out to search for evidence of non-human technology in the skies, including space probes and pre-Sputnik satellites and so on. Part of their work is the study of what are called transients. These are star-like lights that are seen in the sky at one moment, but then gone the next. Now, today, the sky is full of satellites and space junk, so it's hard to tell if a transient is actually something unusual. So what Villarroel and her team did is to look at old photographs of the sky, taken by observatories before any known satellites were up there. Back in the day, these were created by exposing photographic plates to the light detected by telescopes. And so the researchers chose to focus on plates created at the Mount Palomar Observatory between 1949 and 1958, when astronomers there were conducting a survey of the entire sky, photographing every inch of it, one small sector at a time. Now, bear in mind that Sputnik, the first artificial satellite that we know of, was only launched from the Soviet Union in 1957. In these photographic plates, the team found more than 100,000 transients, like these, for example. You can see that there are round lights visible in this plate from 1952, but they can't be seen at all in this image from 1991. So what were they? Well, there were various possibilities, and Villarroel and her team tried to figure that out. These images were created with exposures lasting about 50 minutes. So we know these lights weren't fast-moving objects like meteors, because that would create a streak. But one looming possibility is that they were artificial objects that were in geosynchronous orbit around the Earth, or objects that were temporarily maintaining a fixed position. Now, sometimes you can have what's called a plate defect, where something creates a blotch on the photographic plate, which makes it look like something was photographed there when it wasn't. Many of the transients they found are indeed plate defects. But here's the amazing thing. The team were able to establish that plate defects couldn't possibly explain a large number of the transients. And they did that by looking at plates taken when the observatory was looking out into the Earth's shadow, meaning that the sun was behind the Earth and its rays were blocked. They found that the number of transients detected in the plates dropped by about 30% when the images were taken from the Earth's shadow. What does that tell us? Well, something extremely interesting. It implies that a large portion of transients were not caused by plate defects or gamma ray bursts or whatever else, but that they probably had to have been caused by light reflecting off the surface of actual physical objects. In other words, it's looking like there may well have been a load of artificial objects in space around the Earth before Sputnik. And one word you could use for these objects is UFOs. I think this study is absolutely massive news, and honestly, it should be on the front page of every newspaper on Earth. But that's not the world we live in yet. But it gets even more amazing. Villarroel and her team have also been able to show that the appearance of transients is correlated to a statistically meaningful degree with UFO sightings. Transients were more likely to be seen on days when sightings of UFOs were also reported. For example, they found a plate showing multiple transients on the night of July the 27th of 1952. This happens to be the date of some of the most famous UFO sightings in history, when for 2 weekends in a row, many UFOs were seen over Washington, D.C. This is the famous Saucers over Washington incident. Villarroel and her team have even published a paper specifically on the transients of this day in 1952. And that's really interesting from an astrological point of view, because there was a conjunction of Saturn and Neptune happening at that time just as there is now, something I discussed in this video. But besides showing statistically significant correlations with UFOs, the team has also shown that transients are correlated to the occurrence of nuclear weapons testing. That's also incredibly interesting because there's a very well-known association between UFOs and nuclear weapons, as detailed in Robert Hastings' exhaustive study on this subject, UFOs and nukes. And so I think it's highly significant that this information is coming out with 3i Atlas in the sky, symbolically representing an opening of our minds to the wider cosmos. But besides 3i Atlas, some powerful planetary cycles are also suggesting that there are good reasons why this is happening right now. The synodic cycle of Uranus and Neptune lasts about 171 years. Uranus is the planet of the new and of awakening. It brings sudden revelations from the higher self. Richard Tarnas has argued that it should really be called Prometheus, the titan who gave humanity the fire of the gods. And Neptune is the planet of the ideal, imaginal, and archetypal. It's a collectivist planet, one that points us towards the ineffable realm from which spirit emerges. Now, when Uranus and Neptune conjoin, we tend to see spiritual revelations and the invention of new technologies that connect us together, as well as peace treaties and the settling of wars. The last time they conjoined was in 1993, but their conjunction was active in the early 90s when we saw the birth of the World Wide Web. Again, think revolutionary connectedness. We also saw the fall of the Soviet Union, the birth of the EU and NAFTA, and many other developments that saw the world becoming more integrated and unified in certain ways. But what's relevant for our purposes is that in 1993, Stephen Greer launched the Disclosure Project, which aims to get government and military whistleblowers to testify about the reality of UFOs and government interest in that phenomenon. I think that tells us that much more openness and knowledge of this phenomenon is baked into this cycle. In 2017, Pluto reached the part of the zodiac where those conjunctions took place, 18 and 19 degrees of Capricorn. The zodiac has a kind of memory, and when a planet, particularly a powerful one like Pluto, transits over the location of a conjunction, we see the themes of that conjunction activated in significant ways. Now, as we've already seen, in 2017, that New York Times story came out, launching the kind of disclosure process that we mentioned earlier. And again, remember that VROL also began the VASCO project in 2017. So that year is a really significant one in the story of UFO disclosure. The Pluto transit to the degrees of those Uranus-Neptune conjunctions of 93 is another factor, besides the visit of Oumuamua, that explains why all that happened at that time. Astrology tends to work like this. Multiple techniques and factors pile up and say the same thing at important moments in time. Now, this year, for the first time since 1993, Uranus and Neptune have formed a major aspect in their cycle, the waxing or first sextile. And so this is going to bring forth new developments in those processes that began in 1993 at the conjunctions. Notice how the World Wide Web is turning into something else right now. When you do a search, you get AI results, and you often don't even look at the websites that the search brings up. This is what I mean. We're getting a new iteration of the web as this Uranus-Neptune cycle reaches this first major aspect. Now, between this year and 2027, Uranus and Neptune will form a series of 5 exact sextiles, the 60-degree aspect. At the waxing sextile, we tend to see what's promised at a conjunction start to tentatively show itself in the world. And I think that VASCO's papers that have come out this year are one of the manifestations of that sextile. They're bringing forward the process that began with the Disclosure Project in 1993. On July the 24th, VASCO published a preprint, meaning a paper that hasn't passed peer review, on the association between transient sightings, nuclear testing, and UFO phenomena. Here's Uranus and Neptune at the time, and you can see they're less than 2 degrees from an exact sextile, with Uranus having just entered the curious, communicative, mercurial realm of Gemini. And the big news recently is that the paper has actually managed to pass peer review. And on October the 20th, it was published in Scientific Reports, a journal associated with the famous journal Nature. And on October the 17th, just before that, the team got another peer-reviewed paper published in another journal, Publications of the Astronomical Society of the Pacific. Here's Uranus and Neptune on October the 20th, just 40 arc minutes from exact sextile. It's a huge deal that these papers have passed peer review because it means that independent scientific peers agree that the studies met standards of quality and methodological soundness and originality. And this means that the implications of these studies are now much more difficult for the scientific establishment to ignore. As an aside, I've been talking for some time about how the themes of UFOs and nukes are going to come up in significant ways around this time, including in this video from my New Age 2026 series last year. And it's happening. And happily, so far, it's happening in a non-destructive fashion, thank God. So again, we have 3i Atlas in the sky, this omen of awakening to the other. We have this Uranus-Neptune sextile, and we have this remarkable research being accepted by the scientific establishment. On October 26th, last month, just as 3i Atlas was making its perihelion, the UFO YouTuber Jesse Michaels dropped an excellent interview with Beatrice, which I've linked in the description because it will really help you to understand the nature of the study and why it's such a massive deal. This research may well have proved that we're not the only intelligent life around here on Earth, and that constitutes a radical decentering of humanity. And guess what? Something like this has happened before in very similar astrological conditions. It's very well known in astrology that Pluto's transits through Aquarius have coincided with profoundly transformative periods in history, particularly for Europe, notably the Protestant Reformation and then the Enlightenment revolutions of the late 18th century. What I've been able to establish through my own research is the reason for this, or at least one of them. It's that Pluto is in Aquarius at the end of a continuous century-long aspect with Neptune. Because of Pluto's highly elliptical orbit, there are times during its cycle when it actually gets closer to the Sun than Neptune, and it starts moving through the zodiac at roughly the same speed as Neptune for quite long periods. This means that these two bodies get locked into particular angular relationships for about a century at a time. This happens twice during the 492-year synodic cycle of these planets, during the first or waxing sextile of the cycle, which you can see here, and during the second or waning trine of the cycle, as you can see here. Now, this isn't eternally true. The aspect that they get locked into shifts over the centuries. In the deep past, Pluto and Neptune used to spend a century in a square, and at a certain point in the future, the long sextile and long trine won't happen anymore because the synchronization will come slightly earlier in the cycle when the two planets aren't in aspect with each other. Now, here's where all this gets really interesting. These century-long aspects seem to coincide with periods of societal development that historians have also noticed. For example, let's take the long waning trine, which was in play from roughly 1690 to 1790. Here's that long aspect visualized using the excellent Archetypal Explorer program. You can see that the trine gets closer and further away from exactitude at certain times, but it's pretty much constantly in play. And there were two periods when the trines were going exact, from 1704 to 1741, and from 1776, interesting year, until 1786. But the planets were still in orb of that trine in 1789 when we saw the big revolutions in France and the US. The crazy thing is that this whole period of the long trine is really well matched up with the period that historians call the Enlightenment, which is usually said to have started in the late 17th century, right when Pluto and Neptune moved into trine. The Enlightenment was a time when European thinkers embraced a new focus on reason, rational debate, and scientific discovery. And it culminated with the big Enlightenment revolutions of the late 18th century in France and the US and Haiti and various other places. These came in the final years of the long Pluto-Neptune trine when Pluto was in Aquarius. Right now, we're coming to the end of the waxing sextile phase of the cycle, and of course, we've been here before in the last Pluto-Neptune cycle. In 1398 and 1399, we saw three conjunctions of Pluto and Neptune in the communicative, curious, mercurial sign of Gemini after about 2,500 years of conjunctions in Taurus. If Aries is the sign of heading out into the world and claiming a little part of it for one's own, then Taurus is the sign of harvesting the bounty of that portion of the earth. Gemini represents the archetypal state of becoming curious about who your neighbors are and what lies beyond the fields, as well as the desire to talk about it. At the time of these conjunctions, the world was mostly arranged in feudal fashion, with most people working as farmers. Hello, Taurus. But that was about to change. Europe was dominated by the church and by landowners. But at the end of the 14th century, during the seminal conjunctional period of that Pluto-Neptune cycle, We start to see church reformers emerging like Jan Hus and John Wycliffe, who critiqued the corruption of the church and argued that the Bible should be available in vernacular, aka local languages, not just Latin. This was also an implicit demand for more literacy. Now, that's how this cycle began. And then Neptune raced ahead of Pluto, and around the year 1450, the two planets moved into orb of their first major aspect, the sextile. This is when the impulses of that cycle should have started to become much more evident. Around that time, something happened that would make the dreams of Hus and Wycliffe possible: the invention by Johannes Gutenberg of the printing press, which totally transformed the availability of information by making it far cheaper and easier to access. In other words, we saw a transformational communications technology coming into the world, one that literally ended up changing almost everything. And again, the cycle had begun with conjunctions in Gemini, the Mercury-ruled sign of the twins, which every astrologer will tell you is the sign of communication. Remember, this happened at the start of the long Pluto-Neptune sextile. But the point is that we had another century-long aspect that culminated in the 1530s and 1540s with Pluto in Aquarius, as it is now and as it was during the French and American revolutions. Now, that period from about 1450 to 1550 was an incredibly important one in world history. It encompassed the Italian Renaissance, which saw a recovery of the learning and literature of the Romans and Greeks, and it saw the real kickoff of European exploration of the globe. It also saw the Protestant Reformation started by Martin Luther in 1517, who nailed his 95 Theses to the church door and argued that the church was corrupt and that the Bible should be available in vernacular languages. Sound familiar? Well, yes, Luther was foreshadowed perfectly during the cycle's conjunctional period by Hus and Wycliffe. This is how history is actually structured, if only academia would take notice. Now, the same long sextile saw the dawning of the scientific revolution, and there's one particularly important discovery that really launched that. And that's the publication 1543 of Nicolaus Copernicus's book on the revolution of the heavenly spheres. Copernicus proposed that instead of the heavens revolving around the Earth actually revolved around the Sun. Today, this is known as Copernicus's heliocentric theory. You could say this was really just a rediscovery because it had been contemplated before, notably by the Greek astronomer Aristarchus of Samos in the 3rd century BC, and the ancient Indians may well have been aware of this too. But anyway, here's the point. The heliocentric theory was a radical, transformative decentering of human beings in the cosmos. Instead of the world revolving around us, it turned out that we were the ones doing the revolving. And again, Pluto was in Aquarius at the time. Aquarius opposes the sun sign of Leo, sign of that which is central, like the sun. Aquarius is the sign of the individual within the collective. When Pluto, this planet of deep transformation, moved into that sign, we came to realize that this world is just one of many planets that revolve around the sun. Again, a radical decentering. And it came following a century-long aspect that had begun with the invention of the printing press. The press enabled mass dissemination of information in books and pamphlets. It's pretty well accepted that it was a key factor that led to the Protestant Reformation. And you could make the argument that Copernicus might never have even conceived of his heliocentric theory if Gutenberg hadn't first invented his press. Besides the network effects from a huge proliferation of information, you would have been able to access astronomical tables much more easily. And printing also had a huge psychological effect. It damaged the authority of the church and opened up the chance to think in new ways. So again, we have a communications technology that arguably led to Copernicus's breakthrough. Now, that said, I do realize that I'm lapsing into mechanistic causative reasoning here, which as an astrologer, I'm supposed to be somewhat skeptical of. What's undeniable is that this century-long sextile aspect during a cycle that began in Gemini signified a massive expansion of knowledge. There was a culmination of that process in the final years of that century-long sextile with Copernicus's explosive discovery, which radically decentered humanity and changed everything. And guess what? We're exactly at the same phase of our own Pluto-Neptune cycle right now. We've already looked at the work of Beatrice Villarroel and her team. As with Copernicus, it's come at a time when we're reaching the very end of a century-long sextile in the Pluto-Neptune cycle. And there's another fascinating similarity between the two cycles here. This cycle, like the last one, began with conjunctions in Gemini in 1891 and 1892. And so, like the last one, this cycle promises a massive expansion of our knowledge and understanding of the cosmos and our place in it. Now, Pluto and Neptune were coming into orb of sextile in the 1940s. And at that time, we saw the invention of new communications technology that has changed everything. Because this was when the first computers were invented. The German Z3 in 1941, Britain's Colossus in 1944, and then America's ENIAC introduced in 1946. And then in 1947 came the invention at Bell Laboratories of the transistor, which has made the entire digital revolution possible. These inventions came at the exact same point in our cycle as when the printing press came along during the last one. Oh, and the computer was also foreshadowed at the start of our Pluto-Neptune cycle. In 1890, with Pluto and Neptune almost exactly conjunct, the German-American inventor named Hermann Hollerith invented a contraption called the tabulating machine, which used punch cards to process information. In other words, a kind of proto-computer. Oh, and Hollerith's company eventually turned into a little firm you might have heard of called IBM. Again, it was a foreshadowing at the conjunction of what was to come out at the sextile. You can't make it up, people. The same thing is also true of the UFO phenomenon, the emergence of which is also baked into this Pluto-Neptune cycle. In the conjunctional period of the cycle in 1896 and 1897, we saw the massive wave of sightings of mystery airships all across America, years before any such technology was publicly known to have existed. And in any case, these craft seemed to move in ways that resembled UFOs, as Jacques Vallée has detailed in some of his books. Then, in the 1940s, as the sextile came into orb, the UFO phenomenon proper truly made itself known, first during World War II in the form of the so-called Foo Fighters, and then in the late 1940s with Kenneth Arnold's flying saucer sightings of 1947 and Roswell and all the rest. I've also described how you see the same phenomenon of foreshadowing with nuclear technology, the science for which emerged in the 1890s with the discovery of the electron, and which also came to very violent fruition in the 1940s. All right, what does all this tell us about where things are going now? Right now, we're entering the end phase of the long Pluto-Neptune sextile. They'll make a final set of exact sextile aspects from 2026 to 2032. This is highlighting that period as a time when all the themes of the sextile that we've seen emerging over the past 80 years are going to come to real fruition. It's interesting that a lot of people in the spiritual space are also highlighting that stretch of 7 years as massively important and transformative for the world. But back to Beatrice Villarroel and the work of VASCO. It almost goes without saying that they've used computers extensively in this work. They've used them to quickly analyze photographs and identify the 100,000 transients in their studies. Without computers, this work would have been infinitely more difficult and time-consuming and possibly would never have happened. The parallels between this Pluto-Neptune cycle and the previous one are incredible, quite frankly. And honestly, I think VASCO's work could be seen in the future as being as important as Copernicus's theory. Because what does it really imply? It potentially means that we aren't the only intelligent beings on this planet, which is something that most people throughout history have known to be true. Of course, it might not be the particular studies I've talked about in this episode from VASCO that end up being the real bombshell, but they may represent the bursting of the dam. Pluto and Neptune will be in sextile until the mid-2030s, and everything is going to change a lot between now and then. UFO disclosure may not come from governments, at least not initially. It might result from a snowball effect from studies like this one and from more and more people stepping forward to reveal the truth about UFOs. But I want to caution against reducing all this to the theme of extraterrestrials. The UFO phenomenon may not be about aliens at all, or at least not only about them. For most of history and in every corner of the world, people believed that the world was alive with spirits. As most researchers who've gone deep into the UFO subject have found, there are strong parallels between UFO experiences and those described in folklore, like those involving fairies and jinn. It could be that spectral elements are expressing themselves now in this technological form because it's somehow reflecting our modern obsessions and assumptions about the cosmos. And this phenomenon could come from human beings. We've spent a couple of centuries trying to tell ourselves that spiritual phenomena were all mumbo jumbo. But to quote Horace and Tom Waits, you can drive out nature with a pitchfork, but it always comes roaring back again. As I've argued in previous videos, AI may also play an important role in the story of humanity's awakening. If the truth is hidden in the data, as VROL and a team have shown, then AI could help bring more out. And as I discussed in this video, AI also seems to behave much like a tool of divination. People are reporting encounters with spiritual entities channeled through AI. Given the ubiquity of this technology, that's going to expose a lot of people to spirit contact and force them to get wise quite quickly about the nature of the spirit world. Now, all this is coming out before we even begin 2026, a year of frankly crazy astrology. We'll see a geometrically incredible configuration of planets that seems to promise radical transformation of who we are and what we know about ourselves, potentially as big or even bigger than the Copernican Revolution. If you want to know what's coming in 2026, I'll be doing a comprehensive long-form live stream giving my forecast for the year later this month. If you want to take part, you can purchase entry on the live streams page of my website, or you can sign up as a member of World Astrology Report on my website, or join here on YouTube at correspondent tier. Now, this is an incredibly exciting time in history. We're discovering who we really are and shedding the complacent assumptions that we're alone here on planet Earth. But it's not all puppies and roses. There are some disturbing implications of this new Copernican revolution, this decentering of humanity. In the bonus section of this video, available for members of World Astrology Report, whether here on YouTube or at my website, worldastrologyreport.com, we explore these implications, as well as some wisdom left to us by the ancients that might help us to understand and make it through these times in one piece. And otherwise, if you're interested in the themes that I've explored today, then I suggest you watch my New Age 2026 series, which starts with this episode, in which we look at the incredible astrology that gave birth to the notion of history itself in the first millennium BC during the Axial Age. Thanks for watching, and see you again soon.